The Maurya Empire: Power, Formation, Ideology, and Collapse. Chapter 1: Introduction: The first imperial structure of the Indian subcontinent. The Maurya Empire represents the first large-scale attempt at political unification across the Indian subcontinent, emerging in the late 4th century BCE and collapsing by the mid-2nd century BCE. It was not merely a territorial state but an experiment in imperial governance, administrative integration, ideological projection, and economic extraction across a culturally heterogeneous landscape. Unlike fragmented Mahajanapada polities that preceded it, the Maurya system attempted to impose a supra-regional authority that could coordinate taxation, military mobilization, and political messaging over vast distances. However, despite its scale and symbolic prominence, the empire's internal structure remains only partially understood due to limited archaeological and textual evidence. Chapter 2: The Pre-Imperial Context, Fragmentation, Opportunity, and Strategic Vacuum. Before the rise of the Mauryas, northern India was dominated by multiple competing kingdoms known as the Mahajanapadas. With Magad emerging as the most powerful among them, this region benefited from fertile agricultural land, riverine connectivity, and growing urbanization. However, despite its strength, Magadha had not succeeded in consolidating the entire subcontinent. The second major structural shock came from the invasion of Alexander the Great in 326 BCE. Although his campaigns didn't penetrate deeply into the Gangetic heartland, it destabilized the northwestern regions and left behind fractured strategies after his withdrawal. This created a strategic vacuum that could be exploited by a rising power. The modern state was not inevitable, it was opportunistic. It emerged precisely because systemic instability lowered the cost of conquest. Chapter 3: Chandragupta Maurya, Seizure of Power and Territorial Consolidation. The founder, Chandragupta Maurya, didn't inherit power, he seized it. Around 321 BCE, he overthrew the Nanda dynasty, which had accumulated wealth but lacked legitimacy and elite cohesion. His rise is often associated with the strategist Kautilya, in other words also called Chanakya, whose political doctrines emphasized deception, coercion, and centralized authority. Chandragupta first secured the Gangetic core and then expanded towards the northwest, exploiting the weakened remnants of Alexander's administrative structure. His confrontation with Seleucus I Nicator around 305 BCE ended in Mauryan victory. This resulting treaty granted Chandragupta control over large territories, including parts of modern Afghanistan, in exchange of 500 war elephants, an asset that later influenced Seleucid military campaigns. This phase established the Mauryan Empire as a major geopolitical entity. It demonstrated that large-scale consolidation in South Asia was not only possible but sustainable, at least temporarily. Chapter 4: Bindusar: Silent Expansion and Structural Consolidation. The reign of Bindusar, Chandragupta's successor, is poorly documented, which itself indicates a structural weakness in historical memory. However, available sources suggest that he extended Mauryan authority southward into the Deccan Plateau. Unlike his father, whose reign was defined by conquest and diplomacy, Bindusar's contribution appears to lie in territorial consolidation. The phase is critical because empires often collapse not during expansion but during consolidation. Bindusar's ability to maintain and possibly extend control suggests that the modern administrative framework, however, whatever its exact form is, was functional at scale. Yet the lack of detailed records implies that this system didn't institutionalize its own documentation effectively, a long-term liability. Chapter 5: Ashoka: Expansion, Violence, and Ideological Transformation. The reign of Ashoka represents both the apex and the beginning of decline. Early in his rule, Ashoka pursued conventional imperial expansion, culminating in the conquest of Kalinga around 260 BCE. This campaign resulted in massive casualties and displacement, as recorded in his own inscriptions. The aftermath of Kalinga marks a strategic pivot. Ashoka abandoned aggressive military expansion and adopted a doctrine centered on Dhamma, a moral political framework emphasizing non-violence, social harmony, and ethnic governance. This was not purely religious, it was a governance strategy designed to stabilize a diverse empire without relying solely on coercion. However, this shift introduces a structural contradiction. Empires are maintained through coercive capacity. By reducing emphasis on military expansion and possibly military preparedness, Ashoka may have weakened the empire's long-term resilience. His ideology optimized for internal stability but potentially reduced external deterrence. Chapter 6: The Edicts of Ashoka. Communication as a tool of power. Ashoka's edicts, inscribed on rocks and pillars across the subcontinent, represents one of the earliest examples of state-sponsored mass communication. These inscriptions were written in multiple languages and scripts including Prakrit, Greek, Aramaic, and Kharoshthi, indicating an awareness of linguistic diversity. The context of these edicts reveals several strategic objectives: projection of moral authority, standardization of administrative values, reinforcement of royal legitimacy, soft control over peripheral regions. The edicts do not describe administrative mechanism in detail; instead, they focus on ethical conduct, suggesting that Ashoka relied on ideological integration to supplement limited bureaucratic reach. This implies that the empire may not have had the capacity for direct control everywhere, necessitating indirect influence. Chapter 7: Sources and their limitation, constructing a fragmented narrative. Mauryan history is reconstructed from three primal and prime categories of sources. Number 1: Religious texts. Buddhist, Jain and Brahmanical traditions provide narratives about Mauryan rules. However, these texts are retrospective and often serve doctrinal purposes, leading to exaggeration and bias. Greek accounts. The work of Megasthenes, though partially preserved, offers external observations of Mauryan society and administration. While valuable, it contains inaccuracies and misunderstandings. 3. Arthashastra. Attributed to Kautilya, this treatise outline an ideal model of governance. It emphasizes centralization, espionage, and economic control. However, it is likely a composite text developed over time, and its direct applicability to the Mauryan state is debated. The key implication is that no single source provides a complete or reliable picture. The Mauryan Empire must be understood through triangulation, not certainty. Chapter 8: Administrative Structure, Centralization versus Practical Limits. The Mauryan state is often described as highly centralized, but this characterization is increasingly questioned. The empire's size diversity would have made uniform control difficult. A more realistic model includes core region, the Gangetic Plain, where direct control and taxation were strongest. Strategic provinces, regions with economic or military importance, possibly governed by royal appointees such as princes or governors. Peripheral zones, areas with indirect control where local elites retained authority in exchange for loyal or tribute. Administrative roles mentioned in sources include tax collectors, inspectors, provincial governors. There is also evidence of surveillance mechanisms suggesting that information control was a key component of governance. Chapter 9: Economic Foundation, Taxation, Agriculture, and State Extraction. The Mauryan economy was fundamentally agrarian. Revenue was generated primarily through land-based taxes on output and land quality, trade and production taxes, state-controlled industries in some sectors. According to Greek accounts, up to one quarter of agricultural produce could be taxed. This indicates a high extraction rate, which would have required a functioning administrative apparatus. The state also appears to have regulated trade and maintained infrastructure, suggesting an integrated economic system. However, the extent of direct state control remains uncertain. Social structure, hierarchy, and functional stratification. The Mauryan society was highly stratified. Traditional Indian texts describe a four-fold Varna system, while Greek accounts suggest a more function-based classification. Key features include occupational rigidity, limited social mobility, distinction between urban and rural population, presence of guilds among artisans. This structure facilitated administrative control by assigning roles and responsibilities clearly. However, it also created internal divisions that could undermine cohesion. Urbanization and infrastructure, nodes of control. The Mauryan period saw continued urban development. Cities functioned as administrative centers, trade hubs, military bases. The capital, Patliputra, was one of the largest cities of its time. Archaeological evidence suggests planned layouts, fortifications, and large public structures. However, most construction was likely made of perishable materials such as wood, limiting archaeological visibility. This again highlights the gap between textual descriptions and physical evidence. Chapter 12 Religion and State Policy Pluralism as Strategy. The Mauryan state operated within a complex religious environment that included Brahmanism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Ajivika traditions. Rather than enforcing a single doctrine, the state appears to have promoted tolerance. Ashoka's policy of Dhamma can be interpreted as a unifying ethnic framework, a mechanism to reduce social conflict, a tool to legitimize authority over diverse populations. This approach minimized resistance, but also avoided creating a strong ideological monopoly which may have limited long-term cohesion. Chapter 13 Decline and Collapse Structural Weakness Exposed. After Ashoka's death, the empire rapidly weakened. The causes of decline are not definitively known, but several factors are likely: weak succession, lacking authority, overextension of territory, reduced military emphasis, fragmentation of administrative control, emergence of regional powers. The northwest fell to Greco-Bactrian rulers, while other regions regained autonomy. The final blow came when the last Mauryan ruler, Brihadratha, Brihadratha was assassinated by his general Pushyamitra Shunga. This indicates that internal power structures had already eroded. The center no longer controlled the military, which is a terminal condition for any empire. Chapter 14 Rediscover and Modern Relevance Reconstruction of Legacy. The Mauryan Empire was largely forgotten in India until the 19th century when James Prinsep deciphered the Brahmi script and made Ashoka's inscriptions readable. This rediscovery transformed the Mauryas into a central element of Indian historical identity. Modern India adopted Mauryan symbols, including the lion capital of Sarnath as the national emblem and the Ashok Chakra on the national flag. This reflects a retrospective construction of legacy where the Mauryas are used to symbolize unity, governance, and ethical leadership. Chapter 15 Conclusion Empire as Experiment, Not Permanence. The Mauryan Empire was not a stable long-term system. It was an experiment in large-scale governance under conditions of limited administrative technology. It demonstrated that territorial unification was possible, but it failed to create institutions capable of sustaining that unity beyond a few generations. Its rise was driven by opportunity and strategic exclusion. Its peak was defined by ideological innovation. Its fall was the result of structural limitations that were never resolved. The Maurya Empire's significance lies not in its longevity, but in its demonstration of what could be achieved and what could not be sustained within the constraints of ancient statecraft.